So yeah, like you said, Adrian Olvera, I've been at Dell for a few years. I work on global consumer and SMB CRM. And there's some acronyms there I could break it down to. There's lots of acronyms at Dell. I wanted to start with, well, one, I renamed the presentation before we went to print there, or after we went to print, but say nay to the naysayers. I wanted to show this for Cam, because we were talking about geeks and threadless. And if you just take a look at that photo, that's my son there. And if anybody's a threadless fan, you'll notice this one, Cam. Big seller, I bet, right? Is that right? He got double points at the Comic-Con because he knew that was a Thriller outfit. So that was a good thing. So I'm raising your next generation of customers there. So in instance of time, Dell's a great company. Let's move on, right? So, email marketers. Kind of what Morgan said earlier today kind of struck a chord because I said to myself, there has been a lot of growing up. There's been a lot of figuring out what we want to do as email marketers over the last few years. And specifically at Dell, with a lot of the transformation we've done, we've tried to really focus our email program. We've been guilty of a lot of things that weren't exactly best practice, and a lot of the people who we've worked with, agencies who've told us to stop doing things, could attest to that. But we've done a lot in the last couple of years to turn that around and say, what do we want to do in the future state? And a lot of it, what I want to talk today is a little bit about what we're doing, but more so about how do we stay focused on that? How do we keep a vision in place? How do you sell it in? And once you're there, maintain it. Because a lot of times you can start with a great idea and you hear a lot of agencies tell a lot of the same stories, and unless you really take it with your brand and you take it all the way through and you finish it, it's really just ends up being talk. And that's really more on the brand side, because if we put a lot of pressure on our agencies to do a lot of heavy lifting, but at the end of the day, we really got to keep pushing our own selves here. So a lot of here, this is basically a view of some of the future state things that we've been working on, but this also kind of translates to, what do we do regionally, what do we do globally? What is the right thing to do in a country versus what scales globally? Not everything's going to scale globally, but if you can build a platform that does most of the work for you in other countries, then it works pretty well. So one of the things that we've focused on is really the innovation of adding relevance to our email program, because we've done a lot of batch and blast. We still do it today, really, depending on the country. From a US perspective, we've done a lot of segmented experiences across consumer and SMB, but there's still a lot of work to do. And one of the things that I wanted to cover was, one of the things that we were working on is predictive analytics. How do we get to a one-to-one experience, even though you're doing a list that can't be segmented into 40 versions with 40 different offers? How do you get to a place where there is a one-to-one experience? And when I first looked at it 2 years ago, a lot of the things we said were, how do you do that without spending a lot of money? How do you do that without creating a lot of churn, changing a lot of process? So what we did was, first we set up a lot of conversations with IT. How do we leverage something that's going to be real time, that's going to give us decisions about what products work best for which customer at the subscriber level, and then how do we scale that out to not just email, but sales and everyone else who's involved at the sales and marketing perspective. So we've took something that basically IT had to build once, and then we've worked with our vendors. I'll show you pretty quickly how we translated that to email, because what we didn't want to do is build something for sales, build something for email, build something for social. So it's basically a real-time decision engine, which I'm not going to bore anybody with tech details right here. But if you want to talk about it and geek out, Cam Balzer style, let's do it. So here's a view of kind of the data that comes in. One of the things that we're doing traditionally with CRM is you look at it and you say, segment, 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 here's the best possible thing I can do given the budget for that week. And you do 2 versions when really you could do 1,000. And what this does is basically take that as real time as we can get it. Typically, 24 hours, but brings it down into what are the offers that person should be getting at the subscriber level. And then what would it look like? And we went into a lot of discussions with creative on this for a long time. What's acceptable to the brand? What's acceptable to, relevance versus creative control? And while that still is evolving, depending on the country, we've done a lot of work to leverage the image libraries we have in a way that we don't force the agencies to host. We went through a lot of conversations about that. And really just tried to focus on what's available now, how do we leverage it, how do we put it into email in a smart way, and still maintain some regional control, because everybody wants to be able to go dynamic or not go dynamic, scale it back if you want to have a custom message that isn't dynamic, that doesn't have to be populated at that level. And we can talk about that more in detail as well, but I wanted to show a visual of basically where we were going with that. And stop there, because I wanted to pull it back and say, how do you really drive that? How do you stay focused on it? For us, it was 2 years to get even close to this, and a lot of planning, a lot of conversations with the business, a lot of funding conversations. And, to be honest, 2 years is a long time. People move, orgs change, people change roles. And if the email team hadn't stayed intact the way it has, who knows whether this would have got done. And I think a lot of what email marketers need to start doing is looking at that vision and sticking to it. And, I feel like even though this vision might not be what you would do with your company, what I want to get across is that this same approach, this same sticking to something, inventing something that's new for your business, and making sure it scales as effectively as possible is a pretty good sweet spot that we should all be looking at if you're not already doing that. I was reading an article in Wired recently with Jeff Bezos, and he said, if you're going to invent, you're going to disrupt, you're going to cause noise, and it's easy for employees to get distracted. And we definitely saw that, because everybody wanted to know, what does it mean to me? And when you go into that production level, CRM level, IT level conversation, everyone needs to know. And as the driver of that change, you have to be able to explain to them, know what they already do, and then explain to them how it changes what they're doing to get there. So that's been a lot of that. And I'd say, the other thing here I wanted to cover was saying nay to the naysayers, because over a long setup period, what I saw was I had kept having to it's not having one meeting with one executive or 3 executives and getting approval and go. You constantly have to remind people what you're doing. You constantly have to remind people where it's going to go, and then make the case against any kind of, well, we've been talking about this for a while, and yeah, it's half done, but let's cut it short and move on to something else. And that takes quite a bit of commitment, whether that's your person, that's yourself, or that's someone on your team. That's a pretty critical part of advancing the email program. And it's, especially for us, that's definitely what I've experienced. I wanted to show this to kind of show a high-level view of how we got to that kind of change. And sorry if that's hard to read, but I wanted to show how much, in the beginning we kind of would go to our ESPs and say, dynamic content, one-to-one email, make it happen. Just go, come back, and it better be cheap. And really we kind of wised up over the last few years and said, we're not giving enough back. We're not holding our regions to it, and we're not putting the infrastructure in place to support something like that to scale for them. So a lot of what we've done here, and I wanted to show the little Dell logo by what we did versus what we asked our ESPs to do, because if you leverage their core competencies, and if you're very succinct with direction, ESPs will knock it out of the park. But if you come in and you're vague, and you don't give enough direction, you don't set up the back end, you're basically setting up a lot of people to fail. So I wanted to show this because a lot of this path to change and changing the business revolved around internal homework to do, internal training, making everything easy on IT because they're our friends, and they have to basically build a solution that is going to need to be as simple as possible to scale to, whether it's sales, whether it's services, or whether it's email. And what we've done is try to make it less overlap of work there for them to do. So and again, some of the points there at the bottom were, if you can't read that, is continuous over communication. Like I said, you can really, if you stop talking about something, it's like it's dead. If you stop going and saying, hey, remember, this is 3 quarters away, this is 2 quarters away, and there's a lot of that. Ongoing support, setting up, making sure your teams know that in 3 quarters they might need half a resource. And that goes across, whether that's CRM, if you're in CRM, or whether that's on the brand side. There's a lot of different, everyone's set up differently, and you got to adjust that as you go. So that was kind of the view I wanted to share, and I tried to make it as non-Dell as possible to make it interesting. But that's the core of what I wanted to get across today, and really it's about staying focused, because I think we want to do a lot of things, and if you get distracted by, well, I get a lot of conversations about social and email and mobile and email, and it's kind of like what we talked about today. The mobile site needs to be 100% ready before we go and commit to email. And so when people come and say mobile email, I say mobile site first. Then we'll talk email. But if you have the right platform set up, you can optimize for mobile with something like this, or a similar kind of approach, to where you've already thought about that. So when it comes time to really optimize your mobile email experience, you could say, okay, instead of 6 dynamic offers, we're going to cut it down to 1. And everybody who gets the mobile version is going to see, 1 relevant offer versus, a big long email in their inbox. So, kind of want to stop there, see if there's any questions.
So I have a quick question, because you mentioned kind of the pushback.
Yeah.
In terms of people come to you after you've been doing this for a year and say, gosh, this has just been going on too long. Can't we just move on to something that's going to be successful down the road? Which
right.
seems to be a perpetual cycle in a lot of, many organizations.
Yeah.
How did you talk a little bit more about how you actually combated that? How do you respond back other than just no? What are the cases that you have to go about making to get that done?
Yeah, I think a lot of it came down to explaining the benefit in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of, with any organization, if you're in the production space, you're a production manager, you want to create an email as cheap as possible. How do you make that kind of, or meet that kind of need for them and meet their KPI when you just had a different KPI for CRM, for relevance, and in demand it's traffic and revenue. And it really is just clearly calling out, okay, this is all the different aspects of the benefits of the program. And if there are no benefits to them, being honest about it and saying, hey, you know what? It's not going to make your life easier. It's going to make CRM's life a little easier. It might make demand's life better, but it's not going to really give you an improvement. You might need to just support us because it's the right thing to do for the customer. And there's a lot of different conversations that need to be had there. And especially with an organization as big as Dell, or even smaller organizations, there's still different levels of buy-in to get as you go. And the way you get that buy-in can take a lot of different ways to look at the same project.
You have another question?
Hey, Adrian, this is Stephanie Miller with the Primo. Thanks for a good presentation.
Yeah.
You kind of sort of got to my question a little bit, but I was curious about how you think about baby stepping in, right? So early successes often that an iterative approach. It seemed like you were just saying, resist that a little bit because you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself. So I don't know, maybe you just answered it.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's a bit of, I think it depends on the vision that you have. I think if it's very, very lofty, it might be a 2-year all or nothing type experience. But if there's smaller things that you want to do that just haven't got done, it's applying the same type of principles, in my opinion. It's still the amount of over communication. It's still, don't tell one story, tell all the different stories you need to tell in order to push through what you need to push through.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Adrian.
Yeah.
Final round of applause for our last speaker of the morning.